I never imagined enlisting in the Terran Marine Corps would land me here. On some forgotten chunk of ice and rock at the back end of the galaxy, fighting for my life in an alien training program no human should have to endure. They called it the Xeno Integration Initiative, a grand galactic experiment to create a universal bastion of peace against whatever lurked in the deeper dark. Blah blah blah. All I heard was chants for adventure and see the stars. Fresh out of high school and sick of Earth, I was a prime candidate for their pretty propaganda. Now I realize maybe I should have read the fine print. They say Terran Marines are the toughest in the known universe. That's the spiel they give you in the recruitment centers, gleaming white booths with smiling officers promising glory, camaraderie, the whole 9 yards. What they don't tell you is, tough as we might be, we're soft compared to the rest of the galaxy. See, Earth's a cradle, a plush little world all swaddled up in its atmosphere. We evolved with gentle gravity, temperate weather patterns, 8 hours of sleep, a whole mess of biological luxuries other species weren't afforded. Made us tenacious, sure. Humans are famous for scrappy adaptability, but most of what we consider hardcore? That's baseline for half the sentient races out there. Lesson 1, and this one hit me like a ton of tungsten bricks: basic training doesn't exist in the galactic core. You Terrans with your mollycoddled boot camps, scoffed instructor Varak, my new drill sergeant and a 7-foot behemoth of scales and chitin. You spend months learning what a properly trained lava knows fresh out of the creche. He had a point. While I was sweating out push-ups and cleaning plasma rifles back on Earth, Xenos were apparently dropped straight into live-fire wargame simulations the moment they could walk. Talk about sink or swim, or more accurately, sink or get vaporized. My platoon was made up of recruits all across the spectrum. There was Chala, a wispy insectoid being who could vanish into thin air and reassemble a phase pistol in seconds. Rosh, a tank of a reptilian hailing from a molten world, molten I tell you, whose skin sizzled if temperatures dropped too low. He had to lug around a personal heating unit just to keep from going into shock on our mild training world. And then, of course, there was me. Just Jamie, plain old human Jamie, feeling like the weakest link in the whole intergalactic chain. The first week was a blur of environmental hazard simulations. Wind tunnels that whipped you around like a ragdoll, atmospheric chambers filled with gases that were sweet as candy to aliens but burned my lungs like acid mist. Zero-G combat drills where my clumsy magnetic boots kept fumbling, leaving me spinning helplessly as others zipped by. I'm not ashamed to admit I puked in my helmet more than once. I thought for sure I'd wash out, get dishonorably discharged back to Earth with my tail between my legs. But the medic slapped a nutrient patch on my neck, pumped me full of stabilizers, and shoved me back in line. Failure, apparently, wasn't an option in the galactic core. Not unless you were fully disintegrated, that is. The thing that kept me going through the sleep deprivation, the bone-chilling runs through nitrogen hailstorms, the sparring matches where I was pitted against battle-hardened aliens twice my size, was the others. There was a sort of desperate camaraderie that formed in our ramshackle platoon, built not on shared history or culture, but on the shared struggle to survive. Chala, flitting like a shadow to bandage my plasma burns with some alien concoction that stung like fire but sealed the wound tight. Rosh, his booming voice cutting through the hurricane simulators, guiding me back to the barracks like a scaly lighthouse. Even Varak, under his gruff exterior, possessed a grudging respect for us Terrans, for our stubborn insistence on just not giving up, no matter how bleak the odds. We started learning actual skills, or what passed for them in Xeno training. Weapons handling was a nightmare. I was used to the standardized kinetic arsenal of the Terran Marines. Turns out standardized is a joke on a galactic scale. Energy pulse cannons, biomatter launchers, sonic disruptors. It was like walking into a physics textbook that had gained sentience and a thirst for bloodshed. Half the time I wasn't sure if I'd vaporize the target or myself. Tactics were even worse. Humans are linear thinkers by nature. A to B to C, cause and effect. Turns out, the universe doesn't work in straight lines. My Xeno squad mates thought in 6-dimensional probabilities, battle plans twisting and turning through temporal distortions, exploiting environmental flux that I couldn't even perceive. Every simulation ended with me baffled and usually perforated, the battlefield a kaleidoscope of sensory overload that my human brain refused to process fast enough. Yet, the changes started to creep in. Not huge, dramatic hero's journey transformations. I wasn't suddenly leaping tall buildings or outsmarting the sentient AI that ran the war games. But little things. My lungs burned less in the corrosive mist. My magnetic boots started to find their purchase a beat or two faster. I could stomach the alien protein gloop they called rations, even if it still came up sometimes. One evening, as a purple sun dipped below the jagged ice spires on the horizon, I collapsed beside Chala. Her multifaceted eyes glittered in the fading light. "You're improving, Terran." At first, I calculated a less than 0.02% chance of survival. The odds have increased, she clicked in her strange insect speech. "A compliment, I think." I mustered a tired grin. "Still better than nothing, right?" She chittered, a surprisingly warm sound despite the mandibles. "Indeed. And humans, you are strangely tenacious. It's an evolutionary trait we have begun to find intriguing." There was something in that moment, huddled for scant warmth on a desolate training outpost, sharing a laugh with a being so fundamentally different from me. Something changed. The universe, with all its dizzying dangers and impossible trials, felt a little less hostile. Maybe, just maybe, there was a place for us Terrans out here after all. Maybe being the weakest link in the cosmic chain wasn't such a bad thing, if it meant you had something unique to offer, a stubborn human grit no one else possessed. It wouldn't be easy. It might even be excruciating. But for the first time since they deposited me on this forsaken ice world, something shifted. It wasn't hope, exactly. More like a defiant spark. Like, "Fine universe, you think you can break me? Bring it on." Instructor Varak had a perverse fondness for surprises. It was lesson I learned repeatedly, each one more painful than the last. This particular morning, he greeted our pathetic, shivering platoon under the baleful glare of twin suns with a fanged grin. "Today, recruits, you ascend." His voice boomed over the frozen wasteland, laced with a hint of sadistic glee. Turns out ascend was code for something far less spiritual. We were herded toward a towering cliff face sheathed in impossibly smooth, black ice. At its base clustered a group of spider-like aliens, their segmented bodies bristling with high-tech climbing gear. "Behold, the Thraxian instructors," announced Varak. "They will teach you the noble art of vertical infiltration." Or, a wicked gleam entered his multifaceted eyes, "You will plummet to your highly unimpressive ends." Chala squeaked, a high-pitched insectoid noise I was starting to recognize as a rough equivalent of a human curse. Rosh hissed steam, the temperature spike a telltale sign of reptilian agitation. As for me, I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone bone dry. Even on Earth, I wasn't exactly a rock climber. Now we were scaling alien ice cliffs with zero experience and instructors who, by all appearances, were basically ice spiders. Fantastic. The Thraxians wasted no ceremony. They scuttled forward, clicking and chattering in a language that sounded like shattering glass. Each recruit got a harness cinched on with terrifying efficiency, followed by a pair of what they called mag claws. The claws were less like climbing axes and more like gauntlets tipped with pulsating energy nodes. "Drive them into the ice, focus your intent, ascend," barked the lead Thraxian, waving a segmented limb dismissively in what I assumed was a demonstration. Easy for them. They had about 8 extra limbs and probably some kind of natural magnetic adhesion thing going on. I fumbled with the claws, trying to find any kind of handhold on the unnervingly sleek ice. It was like trying to grip liquid mercury. Chala went first. She was so light, a whisper of chitinous plates and segmented limbs, barely leaving an indent on the surface as she zipped upward. I felt a surge of envy. It figured the bug lady was a natural climber. Rosh was up next. He grumbled, the sound vibrating up through the soles of my boots, and then dug in his claws with a grunt. The ice cracked and gave, sending shivers down the cliff face. That, unfortunately, caused his portable heater to hiccup, spraying him with a blast of sub-zero condensation. He roared, scales flaring in distress, and almost lost his grip entirely. My turn. "Deep breaths, Jamie," I chanted internally. "Don't look down, don't think about the fact that if you fall it's probably a quick death, but only probably. Dig in, focus." I stabbed the mag claw into the ice. It skidded off, and I yelped, the harness cutting painfully into my armpits as I dangled for a terrifying second before catching my balance. Panic surged. This was it. This was the moment I got myself sent home in disgrace, or worse, in a body bag. Then something bizarre happened. The panic burned itself out, leaving an icy kind of determination. My hands went numb, my vision narrowed down to a pinpoint focus. Claw, ice, repeat. Don't think, just climb. It was slow. It was agonizing. Muscles I didn't know I had screamed in protest. But I climbed. Inch by painful inch, I dragged myself up the unforgiving ice face. Finally, a ledge. I collapsed, gasping, the harness digging mercilessly into me. I risked a look down. Even with my limited human vision, the drop was enough to make my stomach lurch. It was a long way to fall. Varak loomed beneath, a chitinous shadow against the ice. "You are acceptable, Terran," he rumbled. It was the closest I'd ever come to a compliment from the instructor. I wasn't done yet. The ledge gave way to another sheer expanse of ice. Then another and another. The Thraxians swarmed far above, chittering their alien amusement at our fumbling efforts. Hours passed, maybe days. I lost track of time. My vision blurred, my limbs grew numb. But beneath it all, there was that defiant spark. Every time I thought I couldn't take another meter, couldn't jam those blasted claws into the ice one more time, I would. Just to spite the universe, spite Varak, and maybe, somewhere in there, to spite myself. When I finally pulled myself over the last ledge, Chala was waiting. Her faceted eyes widened, an insectoid version of surprise. "You who climbed it," she chirped. I wanted to smile, wanted to let out a triumphant whoop. Instead, I slumped to the frozen ground and promptly passed out. When I regained consciousness, I was in the medbay. Not the cold, sterile human-style medbay I knew back on Earth, but the Xeno version, all shimmering force fields, glowing alien fluids, and an unsettling lack of familiar equipment. Patches hummed against my skin, needles pulsed with strange light, and somewhere in the distance, a Thraxian doctor chirped what I hoped were reassuring clicks. "Easy, Terran," Rosh's voice boomed from beside me. His own scales were laced with frostbite and he sported several bandages that weren't there before the climb. "You overdid it. Collapsed clean out of your harness." I groaned, the world swimming back into view. Just surviving the climb wasn't enough, I had to pass out dramatically at the end. How long was I out? Several cycles. "You Terrans are surprisingly fragile." Rosh rumbled a chuckle. To his species, days were probably like hours to us. Chala materialized next to my bed, clicking softly in concern. That she even seemed remotely worried about a human was progress in itself. "The medics say you pushed yourself to your limits, and beyond," she chirped. It was not the most logical strategy. "Humans got where we are by being illogical," I mumbled, wincing as I tried to shift position. Everything hurt in ways I didn't know muscles could hurt. A new voice joined the chorus, a harsh rasp that set my nerves on edge. Instructor Varak loomed over my bed, a chitinous mountain of disapproval. "You climbed the face, Terran. A feat most recruits struggle to achieve in their first cycle. Yet, you took the path of greatest difficulty, exerted more effort than 10 times your size, and still achieved a mediocre result." My annoyance fled, outstripping the exhaustion. "Hey, I dash." "Silence," Varak snapped. "Do you think this is some Terran boot camp? Pathetic displays of exertion will not earn respect here. It took you cycles to do what any Thraxian hatchling accomplishes within their first hours." The comparison stung. I couldn't even argue, the other recruits were recovering faster, already eyeing a chamber in the corner labeled sensory immersion training. Chala clicked in agreement with Varak, and even Rosh looked faintly amused by my human struggle. It hit me then, a wave of disorienting absurdity. These aliens, built for entirely different worlds, different gravities, different life cycles. For them, the climb was probably the equivalent of a brisk walk. My limit-breaking effort was their version of a morning stretch. The universe, it turned out, had a warped sense of humor. "You will report for restoratives, then resume training immediately," Varak barked, breaking my reverie. "Failure to keep pace will result in expulsion from the program." He marched off, the clipped sounds of his chitinous legs echoing in the cavernous medbay. Rosh laid a clawed hand on my shoulder, a surprisingly gentle gesture from the reptilian. "Don't listen to him, Terran. You showed something out there today. Grit, they call it." "More like stubborn stupidity," I grumbled, but it lacked bite. They were right, of course. It wasn't enough to just survive this alien training program. I had to somehow excel amidst beings born with advantages I could never match. That meant finding a different angle, using the illogical human way of thinking that Chala had mentioned. "Hey," I said, a thought germinating in my aching brain. "How good are those Thraxian doctors at, studying alien physiology? Like, human physiology?" Chala tilted a multifaceted eye at me, and the corner of Rosh's lipless mouth curled into a distinctly reptilian grin. It was a long shot, a uniquely human kind of gamble. But when you're light years from home and surrounded by casually superhuman aliens, maybe going all in is the only thing that makes sense. The sensory immersion training turned out to be about as fun as it sounded. It involved a cramped pod, several invasive probes, and a headpiece that blasted my brain with a nauseating barrage of alien stimuli. I emerged hours later, My vision tinted a peculiar shade of fluorescent green and the lingering taste of something like burning rubber on my tongue. Analysis complete. Your biological limitations are considerable, Terran, proclaimed the Thraxian medic. Its clicking mandibles held a distinctly condescending edge. Limitations. A funny word for it after witnessing my Xeno classmates casually bending the laws of physics as they trained. Chala could phase shift her limbs to pass through targets, while Roche was able to trigger a metabolic boost that let him smash through solid matter with his bare hands. Me? I could sweat, a lot, and apparently possessed a surprising tolerance for pain. Not exactly superpower material. But the medics hadn't studied human physiology for nothing. They'd mapped my neural responses, my metabolic cycles, the infuriatingly slow self-repair mechanisms of my Terran body. They'd quantified just how far behind I was in a dozen different metrics. And yet, somewhere within that data, I hoped, was the key to turning my limitations into a strength. The training ground hummed with activity in the aftermath of my sensory immersion ordeal. Targets flickered in and out of phase space, defying my eyes to track them. Simulated energy blasts seared the air, calibrated to just below lethal levels. Through it all, the other recruits danced with an ease that left me breathless with envy. Perhaps it's time you went home, Terran, Varak taunted from his usual observation post. Your continued presence is disruptive to morale. Instead of despair, I felt a surge of heat. Not Roche's superheated scales kind of heat, but a slow burn determination. With all due respect, instructor, I rasped, the effort catching in my throat. Shove it. He reared back, a rumble of surprise vibrating through his thorax. Nobody talked back to Varak. You want me gone? I locked eyes with him. Make me fail. Give me a test no human can pass. But until then, I'm staying. And I'm going to learn to survive out here, even if it kills me. Silence descended. The other recruits slowed, their movements hesitant as they processed the audacity of an underperforming Terran defying their drill instructor. Varak's mandibles clicked together, a sound akin to steel grinding against steel. Then, the barest hint of a rasping chuckle echoed across the room. Very well, Terran. You seek a challenge? A chance to prove your worth? His voice held a dangerous edge. I nodded, jaw set. I didn't know what was coming, but it wasn't going to be easy. Tomorrow, Varak hissed, you will enter the gauntlet. The name sent a shiver down my spine. The gauntlet was the stuff of whispered legend among recruits, a series of trials designed to push you to the absolute breaking point. Most didn't come back the same. Some didn't come back at all. Chala flitted closer, a tremor running through her usually composed exoskeleton. It is designed for our physiology, for our strengths. There is no shame in refusal, Terran. Maybe not, I said, thinking of Earth, the faces of my friends and family flashing through my mind. But a stronger vision took their place, that stubborn, defiant human who had scaled an impossible ice cliff just to prove she could. But I'm not leaving this frozen wasteland without giving it my best shot. Sleep was a fitful thing that night, filled with fractured dreams of crumbling ice shelves and chittering insectoid laughter. Yet, when dawn broke with its alien suns, I faced the gauntlet with something less like courage and more like quiet resignation. The first trial was a sensory overload nightmare, blinding strobes, dissonant shrieks that threatened to split my skull, and waves of noxious fumes that brought my knees. I staggered through, blinded and choking, guided only by the echoes of Chala's panicked chirps and the deep rumble of Roche's encouragement. Next came the labyrinth. Walls shimmered and shifted, gravity flickered, and my internal compass spun into uselessness. Here, at least, my uniquely linear brain was something of an advantage. When Chala got caught in a temporal recursion loop and Roche literally smashed his way through a wall that wasn't there, it was me who found the painfully simple exit. Each trial was a twisted testament to the bizarre diversity of the galaxy. I endured biotoxin chambers designed for methane breathers, outmaneuvered a predator with four-dimensional vision, and translated a battle script written in a cryptographic language of pure sonic manipulation. And each time, it was my human peculiarities that saw me through. My adaptability, forged on an evolutionary cradle world. My capacity for focused desperation when the odds tipped too far against me. And yes, a stubborn streak wider than a nebula. When I stumbled out of the final chamber, broken but unbroken, even Varak seemed at a loss. It wasn't a perfect run, not even close. But I had made it. I was no Thraxian, no Roche or Chala. I would never climb cliffs with their speed or out-strategize a multi-dimensional being. But in that place, at that time, in that twisted crucible of the galactic core, I was Jamie, the Terran. And maybe, just maybe, That was enough. Instructor Varak's report, grudgingly filed weeks later, was a strange mix of frustration and cautious admiration. Subject: Terran recruit, Jamie, it began. It detailed my subpar scores, biological drawbacks, and what he termed illogical persistence. Yet, it also highlighted unexpected strengths, adaptability, a capacity for rapid learning under extreme pressure, and an unwavering determination that bordered on the absurd. The conclusion made the whole report worth it, potentially useful, if properly exploited. Continued observation recommended. Properly exploited. I wasn't sure if I should be offended or take it as backhanded praise. But as I stood beside Chala, Roche, and the rest of my battle-scarred platoon, something felt undeniably different. The stares had lessened, replaced by a wary respect. I was still the odd one out, the weak link slowly forging itself into something a bit stronger. But for the first time, I believed I might just belong here, among the stars. And that report, sitting on a desk light years away? It might well be the first tremor heralding change. Humans were coming to the wider galactic core, and we weren't leaving quietly. We were going to make them rewrite their manuals, shift their expectations, and maybe, just maybe, change the course of their conflicts. Because, as it turns out, being soft, breakable, and stubbornly illogical can be your biggest asset of all, out here amidst the unforgiving universe. But that's a lesson for another day, another planet, another insane trial by fire.